Hey everybody, let's get our update before we start with the King David series where as we go through 1 Samuel now, David is being threatened by Saul and he's going to move to a place called En-Gedi. But let's get an update first so we know what happened over the last couple of days. The IDF reports exactly what they did. It was 2 a.m. The IDF began conducting their precision strikes on several military targets in Iran in response to Iran's continued attacks through Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the missiles, the ballistic missiles, the drones, everything that Iran was doing. So Israel finally responded. They said they'd do it at a time when they wanted to do it. But what did they strike? Well, there's a lot of interesting things that they struck. It's going to include Russia here in just a minute, so this is a big deal. So we're going to get there. By the way, there were 4 women pilots in the strike from Israel to Iran. You know, that just really grinds on the people of Iran that happened. Wow. Okay, multiple missile manufacturing facilities that aided in Iran's ongoing attacks against Israel were targeted. Several surface-to-air missile arrays and other Iranian aerial capabilities that posed an immediate threat to Israel were also targeted. Much more going on with all of this, too. Check this out. And this is the big deal. Israel reportedly, get this, and this is, wrap your head around this, reportedly wiped out all 4 of Russian-made S-300 air defense systems in a powerful strike on Iran. Hananya Naftali reported on it. Thank you, Hananya, for reporting this. Your updates are fantastic. It was a major blow to Iran's defenses. Iranian people are asking Israel on social media to strike more targets. What I think we don't understand in the West is that there are many people in Iran, the civilians, that hate the Iranian regime. It's different than what happened in Gaza, with the people in Gaza. The people in Iran they've been around long enough to remember how good it was back in the former days. And there's many people that are coming to faith in Christ. or my friend Hormuz Shariat, excuse me, he has a ministry to Iran, just absolutely fantastic. I've had him here on the program before, and it's called Iran Alive, and probably the more of an evangelistic effect coming from him and his ministry than anybody else. But many people in Iran are actually Christians. They hate what the regime is doing. But okay, so we have that dynamic that's totally different from what we've seen in Gaza. Okay, now with that, given that, also as Naftali reported, you have was all 4 of the S-300 missile defense systems from Russia were taken out by Israel. Okay, now, as I've been speculating, so many of my colleagues, that out of this, what's going to happen is this is humiliating to Iran. It's also it's somewhat humiliating Russia. Russia supplied these to Iran. Israel goes and takes them out. What do we know is going to happen? In the Ezekiel 38 battle, Russia, Iran, Turkey, they're going to come against Israel from the north. Along with the south, you have Sudan and Libya, which Russia's totally involved with them now. Listen, that battle of Ezekiel 38 is not going to happen now. It's going to happen at a time when Israel lays down their weapons. It's going to happen at a time when Israel is not suspecting this great invasion coming from the north. It's going to descend like a cloud, Ezekiel 38, and it's also going to come on the ground. It appears to be an air and ground invasion, one that greater than Israel's ever experienced before. When we look back over the past few months, April and then just a few weeks back, with all of the missiles that were coming, the ballistic missiles from Iran, that was frightening to people living in Israel, but God protected them. God never slumbers nor sleeps. He protects the land of Israel. When we were just there in Israel, God protected us, and we had quite frankly, we had a great time, felt very safe. But when this invasion comes from Russia and Iran, it's going to be absolutely overwhelming, to the point where it's going to appear to Israel like the end of Israel, like the end of them. It's going to appear to the world that it's the end of Israel. But guess what? God's going to intervene. In Ezekiel 39, we read about the victory. But as Israel does this to Russian targets, or the Russian missile defense targets in Iran, we know that Russia also has been giving Hezbollah weapons through Iran. They're still Russian weapons. And you look at this is humiliating for Russia, it's humiliating for Iran. What's going to happen? I believe this lays the groundwork for the conversations, which I'm sure already began a long time ago, for why Iran and Russia are going to say, hey, let's move. Remember in Ezekiel 38, God says Gog is going to have an evil plan that's going to come into their heart. God says, I will turn them around, put hooks in their jaws, and pull them down. Right now, Russia's pushing into Ukraine, but it appears God's going to pull them down. And this is a motivating factor, what's happened to Iran, what's happened to these defense systems, these Russian defense systems. I totally believe it is a motivating factor for Russia and Iran, Turkey to say, okay, let's all together, let's go after Israel. We've had enough of this. But that battle is not going to happen yet, folks. It comes at a time when Israel's dwelling in peace and safety. They've laid down their weapons, and they're not suspecting anything. Right now, Israel's on guard. They're suspecting everything. If you have a red rocket alert like I do, the Hezbollah is still launching missiles. Israel's still dealing with that. We have this major terror attack, a ramming attack where many people were injured and some were even killed in the ramming attack. That just happened too. So those dynamics are still developing. All right, so we get that. And we're going to be with 1 Samuel, just a minute, with David and Getty. But a couple of things just to keep in mind. Well, one of them, I'll just update you with this, and then we'll get going with the life of David, the King David series. Tim Walz is in an interview, I watched it, with AOC. He implies, basically says, we will win, meaning him and Kamala are going to win the White House. And he implied, I will make you, AOC, the Speaker of the House. Friends, I want you to understand how important this election is. Can you imagine AOC being the Speaker of the House, anti-Semite, Kamala Harris being the president? These people are wicked. Tim Walz, what a wicked man. Could you imagine? I want you to understand how important this election is. I can't tell you enough. Do your part. Get out and vote. And you might say, well, Trump is, people are looking like Trump's the savior. Listen, Trump's not the savior. Go back to the time of Book of Judges. When God raised up a deliverer, he didn't yet raise up the Messiah, but he raised up a Gideon. He raised up a Samson. Let me tell you, Samson's character was not very impressive, but God raised them up as deliverers. And I look at where we are right now. We need a deliverer. Trump is not the Messiah. No political figure is the Messiah. Jesus is still coming. But I look at such a time as this, vote and realize what God is doing, that right now a righteous vote for salt and light, for the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, will hold back the tide of evil. I want you to think that Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, AOC, and the rest of these evil people, a vote in the right direction will at least hold back the tide. You're not voting for the next pastor. You're not voting for a pope. You're not voting for the holiest person in the world. You're voting for a deliverer from the evil that is taking place. And if you can wrap your head around that, if you're someone who's undecided, get out and vote. But what's coming to Israel, if Kamala wins, you can see it now. But in the meantime, I will stand with the Lord. We'll stand on the Bible. God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm thankful that Israel attacked and went into Iran. By the way, I was in a conversation. Someone said Israel will never go and attack Iran. Well, the next day they did, into Iranian territory with 2,000 different strikes inside Iran. So that's what Israel has done. We'll wait and see what's going to happen next. We're going to follow this. I'll keep you updated throughout this whole week. I'll bring in some of my Israeli friends if I can get them online. But God bless you guys. Let's continue right now with King David. Okay, one oops. I had mentioned it was 2,000 targets that Israel has, 2,000 kilometers away. Even when military strategists around the world were saying it's impossible, Israel couldn't do this. They did it, required refueling, but they did it. Hey, we will stand with the Lord and we will stand with Israel. Hey, let's continue with the series in David. Hey, everybody, great to see you. And the amazing things that are happening, and glad I was able to do an update with you. And right now, we're continuing with the King David series. Last week, if you were with us, we were down there right on the Gaza border at Nova, teaching with David and the different invasions that would come from the Philistines. And we're going to pick up from there as David is continuing to flee from Saul. And we're going to go to Engedi in just a minute. But hey, I look at this place right here, and I start making some connections, and it's really an amazing thing when you think about it. So Saul hates David. He's chasing him. When we pick up here and where we left off, Saul was closing in on David in the area of Ziph. David's on one mountain, Saul's on another. Saul knows that David is there. However, Saul gets news, hey, the Philistines have invaded your home. So Saul and all of his men, they got to go back to the area of his home, and they've got to go and defeat the Philistines. They got to do battle against Philistines. So while there, again, they came across the border, Philistines. Unbelievable. Here we are 3,000 years later. Things are repeating themselves. Different people, same thing. Okay, Saul goes back home, deals with the Philistines. He defeats them. But while Saul and his army are gone, David and his 600 men, they take advantage of that time. They escape from the mountain of Ziph, and they go to a place that we know as En-Gedi. And David has an opportunity to get even. So we're going to work through that here in just a minute. But I can't help but think of getting even. And many years ago, probably about 40 years ago, I had a pool cleaning service, and I also had a lawn service at the time. And I had an account with a customer. They hired me for a month, and they would pay me at the end of the month. That was how I worked things. And this particular customer, they hired me to do their lawn and to clean their pool. And I did all of this work for them, went there every week, kept everything clean, trimmed up everything, did the whole bit. Every time I saw them, they came out, their kids came out, and they always said wonderful things about me. And then it came time for them to pay me, and they didn't pay me. And then I kept going, and they promised, oh, you're going to get the check. Come on back next week. And they extended me out probably about 2 months of work they got out of me, taking care of their pool, taking care of their lawn. And I told my roommate at the time, he used to sell pool chemicals, and he was also a mechanic that would service pools. And he said, hey, I told him about the situation. These people haven't paid me. It's been 2 months. I'm not going to get any money out of them. They've gotten hundreds of dollars worth of material and work out of me. And he said, I have just a solution. He goes, give me their address. And he goes, I'm going to throw a can of paint in their swimming pool. And he goes, it'll destroy all of their equipment. So I'm not kidding you. So I gave him the address, and the people's, their backyard, I'm not recommending you do this, and I wasn't saved yet, but the people, their yard and their fence backed up to a street with, it was just behind it. So what he did is he pulled up to the street, took a can of paint that was open, threw it over the fence into their pool, destroyed everything. Listen, I never got my money out of them, but I had a little bit of this thought of vengeance. They get their payback. And they're not going to give me the money, but you know what? He said it'll just ruin everything. So I felt kind of good about it. But back then, listen, I wasn't a believer, but it was this payback. It was this vengeance. We're going to take it out on them, and so be it. Well, David, he has this opportunity for a payback time on Saul. Remember, Saul's trying to kill him. And we pick up in chapter 23, the last verse of chapter 23, David and his men are fleeing to the place of En-Gedi, and it says, and David went up from there. In other words, he leaves Ziph. He leaves that area where he was. He went up from there, and he dwelt in the strongholds at En-Gedi. Again, Saul had gone away. He'd gone back to homeland to fight against the Philistines. Verse 24, or chapter 24, verse 1 says, now it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines that it was told to him, saying, take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. So he came to the sheepfolds by the road, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to tend his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. So he went to attend his needs. In other words, Saul went into the cave you can figure out, he went into the cave to go to the bathroom. And then the men of David said to him, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you. And David arose and secretly cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He's like brokenhearted. What have I done? And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing that he is the anointed of the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and he went on his way. Wow, we can picture the whole thing, right? The cave, David and his men are in the cave. It's a massive cave. Saul goes in to go to the bathroom. David cuts off the robe. Saul leaves, and David feels bad. Feels bad that he cut off his robe. When you look, you go, David, vengeance. You could have done it. Saul's been trying to kill you. Well, let's work through this. So first, number one, the first main point we come to is it's David's opportunity to get even. Again, Saul is out to kill David. He's been chasing him all over the countryside. Even before David killed Goliath, when you start to think about it, with Saul, the Bible told us that Saul was head and shoulders above everybody else. Saul was a big man on the outside, but on the inside, he was a person of very small character. David, he was a man who was young, and he was the one who was serving the sheep. His parents didn't think anything about him. His brothers used to mock him and ridicule him. But David was a man of great character. And you look at this, and by now, Saul, this man of little character, who has this great big army, chasing David all over the countryside. By this time, it's been several years that he has been chasing David, trying to kill him. Each time it's failed. It seems like Saul would wake up and go, maybe I shouldn't do this. And Saul knew, also he knew that the Lord had anointed David to be king. But he was such a little man on the inside. He was enraged with jealousy. He might speak good things on the outside, but he was enraged with jealousy over David. What God is doing with David, listen, be careful. When you see God doing something with another person, you're thinking, well, that should be happening to me. Be very careful. Don't go down that path. Just recognize God is his hand on this person for whatever work, and he has his hand on you for whatever purposes he has created you for. But you don't want to become like Saul and have these jealousies towards other people that God has anointed for whatever purpose he's done it, right? You move on, you say, how can I, what Saul would have done, which would have been much better, is to support David. Knowing David's to be king. Should have supported him, but he wouldn't do that. He wanted to kill him. So David, he has this opportunity to kill Saul. He's in a place called En-Gedi. So check this out. I've been to En-Gedi many times. If you've been to Israel with me, you have probably been to En-Gedi. We got these cool pictures we'll show you to give you an idea. There it is. There's one of the pictures looking back at the cave of En-Gedi. A very good chance that David and his men stayed in the cave back there in the area of En-Gedi. This is a layout of the land. It's down there by the Dead Sea. We have a few more pictures to show you. Really cool place to go to. If you get a chance to go to Israel, there you can see one of the goats. There's another on the left. Remember, it tells us here that this is the wilderness. Take note, he's in the wilderness of En-Gedi, the rocks, verse 2, of the wild goats. So this is it. This is the area that David was in with his men, hiding in the cave at En-Gedi. There's a really good map. You can see it down there. You see the Dead Sea, and you can see just to the left of the Dead Sea, or right on the edge of the Dead Sea, you see a black dot, and it says En-Gedi there. Judah is over to the left of that. Gives you an idea. Also, straight across from there would be the area of Gaza. So there's another map, and you see Gaza all the way over to the left, and Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron, and Gath, the cities of the Philistines. And there's En-Gedi over by the Dead Sea. You see each of these arrows. These are the different areas that David was fleeing to on his journeys. Pretty cool. But I look at that, and going to En-Gedi, man, if you've been there before, it is definitely one of my favorite places to go when you go to Israel. And if you've been there, you know it too. It's such a cool thing to see. And knowing that David was in that cave, there's so much evidence that that cave that you saw there was the actual cave that we are reading about right here in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Man, when I see things like that when I'm over there, it is just one of the coolest things that you see. You almost might be wondering, how could David's 600 men fit in a cave? Well, the cave is massive, and there are massive caves all over Israel. I mean, humongous caves. They're like underground cities. And Engedi was a large cave, and you might wonder, well, how could Saul have gone into there and gone to the bathroom, and David's men whisper in his ear, and Saul not have heard because you're in a cave? There's 600 men. Well, remember, Saul, he has 3,000 men on the outside. A few of Saul's men may have gone in there, even though it says Saul went into the cave to be alone. At least that's what's implied there. But they would have had animals with them. They would have had whatever else they brought with them, all of their cooking utensils. 3,000 men would have been pretty loud on the outside of the cave, and some of that noise would have been on the inside also. So with that type of volume, it would have been pretty easy for one of David's men to whisper in his ear, "Hey, David, there's Saul. Now's your chance to take him out. Now's your chance to take him out." But notice, as David has an opportunity to take vengeance on Saul, who's tried to kill him, notice the first thing here is David, he restrained himself. Verse 4, check it out. The men, it says here, of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord has said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you." And David rose up and he cut off his robe, and he was troubled by it, that he cut off his robe. But it even tells us here also that David, what did he do? He restrained himself from killing Saul. He could have done it, but he didn't do it. He restrained himself. He said, how can I do this thing? He was bothered enough just by cutting off the robe, cutting off a piece of Saul's robe. So you can imagine, Saul's going to the bathroom. David sneaks around, doesn't have one of his men do it. David sneaks around, cuts off a corner of his robe. Because Saul would have taken off his robe to go to the bathroom, would have laid it over here, gone to the bathroom, right? I don't think I need to give you more of a visual. It's over here. David cuts it off. Saul gets redressed, and you look at this, and you got to think David's men probably telling him things like, "Hey, David, you can shorten our misery. We've been running around with you for a long, long time. Before it's 400 men, now it's grown to 600 men. These are the outcasts of society too, but they become David's mighty men. Nevertheless, they're running all around with him. Joab would have been with him and others. And no doubt they would have had thoughts like, David, you've got to do this. Take Saul out. We won't have to run anymore. You can finally claim the kingdom. They even say the Lord is giving, they've decided what the Lord is doing. Interesting. You ever have somebody like that where you know what the Lord is doing in your life? And they come along and they say, well, the Lord showed me this about you. So David's men are doing that to him. They're wrong. David is in the right. But David would have had all of this pressure. David might feel like a coward if you don't go after Saul, or being told something like that. His men might have whispered those things afterwards. David should have done it. He was a coward. He should have taken out Saul. You know, that type of thing. Or I imagine that he might have even seemed like a fool. David, you can shorten our suffering in running, and you can shorten your own suffering in running. You don't have to do this anymore. You can seize the kingdom. But even in this, God had a purpose. He was even testing David, believe it or not. So be careful of those people who come along and say, well, the Lord showed me this about you, because there are people like that in the Christian world. I've run into them many times, and you're thinking, wait a minute, the Lord has shown me something entirely different. I have many people that tell me, the Lord has shown me how you need to do ministry. The Lord has shown me how you need to do this. Well, the Lord hasn't shown me the way you're saying I need to do. And besides that, who are you? If you're supposed to do that, you go do that stuff. I'll do ministry the way the Lord shows me. You go do ministry the way the Lord shows you. But stop telling me the Lord has shown you about this about me. So David, he's in that kind of position. So first of all, David, he restrains himself. We also notice this, David, he respected Saul's position. Verse 6, he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master. The Lord's anointed, stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. Verse 7, so David restrained his servants with these words, did not allow them to rise up against Saul, and then Saul, he goes on his way. David says, I cannot do this against the Lord's anointed. When David restrained himself and he thought through this, his words struck to the heart of his men, and his act of humility quenched their own thoughts of revenge. And his servants noticed this about David, and it affected them because David's words and David's actions were exactly the opposite of what they thought David should do. It's a lesson to keep in mind. For all of us, we're all being watched. Others will do things the way we do them if they believe that we are some type of a leader. If they see love, they will love. If they see hate, they will respond in hate. It happens with employees and it happens with employers. I've stayed in hotels before, and all of the hotel staff is wonderful, and you know it comes from the top. And then I've stayed in them before, and all of the hotel staff is actually absolutely awful, and they treat you terrible. And you know, they need a new boss. Their boss is a difficult person, and their boss is this way, so the employees reflect that type of thing. It happens with ministries. If the pastor's a jerk, the staff starts being a jerk to the people, and the people start saying, these people are jerks at this church. The pastor's wonderful. And the staff starts reflecting that because the pastor's full of joy and so forth. And then the people start reflecting that too. It happens with moms and dads and their children. Children will do things according to the way they see their moms and dads doing them. Speaking of, I've read many times that the best thing a parent can do is to love each other. You love each other, it reflects greatly, and your children respond differently, and they understand the concept of love instead of anger and hatred or bitterness or something like that. By the way, for the record, this passage where David says, I cannot do such a thing against the Lord and against his anointed, has been misused by both Christians and pastors and ought not to be so. I've heard it said many times, how could you do that against the Lord's anointed? Let's work through that and see what this is really a reference to. First of all, this is not about defending yourself or your family. I'm not going to do this. If somebody breaks into your house, you're gonna go after them, right? You're not gonna let somebody break into your house. I'm just gonna cut off the robe and let them know we're all hiding in here. This isn't about the enemy coming across Gaza and going after Israel. David, obviously, he dealt with that problem. He said, hey man, I've got to deal with the Philistines. Repeatedly, he had to deal with it. Got to deal with the enemy. This has nothing to do with Israel right now, not going after Hamas or Hezbollah. No, they need to deal with that problem. That is an enemy that is evil. It has nothing to do with something like that. This is not about defending against something that is evil, although Saul was acting evil at the time. Israel has every right and needs to respond the way they are responding to their wicked enemies. But there's another way that this, and people are saying, Israel should just stand down. It's just absurd. That kind of stuff coming from Kamala Harris is just absolutely absurd. The UN, evil stuff. No. But there's another way this has been taken out of context too, again, where David says, I cannot do such a thing against the one who is anointed by God, right? Sometimes pastors will say something like this. They've done something that they know they should not have done. As somebody challenges them on it, how dare you say that against the anointed of the Lord? You guys probably seen some pastors like that and seen them on TV. It's like, wow, you got busted. You're a crook. You're a criminal. You're a thief. You're greedy. You cheat on your wife. You're whatever. You know, you start looking, going,
wow, you manipulate the masses. You see all these different things. How dare you say that against the Lord's anointed? And they'll use that to deflect from them, to get you to leave them alone, claiming it is about them. Don't touch the Lord's anointed, you'll be in trouble with God. And you hear, I've heard preachers say that. You guys probably have heard that too. But this has nothing to do with talking with a pastor or even discussing something with him that he's done wrong. Listen, it's wrong to use this verse to insulate a pastor from accountability. We need to be able to understand that there's accountability for all of us, right? It's putting in the right context. In fact, David may not have killed Saul, but he will rebuke Saul. He's still going to challenge him. He didn't kill him to take the throne, but he does. He'll rebuke him. Well, let's look at this next thing. Number 2, the next main point. The outcome is unpredictable. Why do I say unpredictable? Because David is doing everything that is against human nature. He's doing this God's way, not man's way. Man's way is predictable. God's way is not predictable. Even when it seemed like God had given him the opportunity for revenge, it was really a test for David whether or not David could be tempted to take revenge for himself or leave it to God. And David passed the test. I mean, imagine you're put in a similar position. It's like, wait a minute, God has given me this opportunity. Here's the robe. There's Saul right into, God's brought him to me. How can it be more obvious? You ever felt like that? Man, I've been in similar situations, not with a robe or somebody go to the bathroom or something like that, but in similar positions where it seems like God is doing this and I need to change. I have an opportunity to change the outcome. I have an opportunity to change my circumstances. And yet I got to remind myself, wait a minute, is this a test? And I got to pray, God, I believe that I'm committed to your word, and your word tells me that a righteous man, he swears to his hurt, but still does not change. If you make a vow to God, even if it's bringing pain to you, if you make a vow to God, you keep your vow. It's understanding those passages. You don't want to vow something to the Lord and then go back on it because you realize it's going to bring some pain. You got to stick it out. And so you realize, wait a minute, it looks like I could change the outcome or I could change the circumstances I currently have. I made a vow to God. I committed to people. This is the thing I'm going to do. You, as the proverb says, you swear to your hurt, but you still don't change. You understand David, he could have taken out Saul. He's going through a time of great hurt. It's been going on for a long time now. But he still says, wait a minute, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to leave this in God's hands. Verse 7, David restrained himself, and he restrained his men. His men saw what David did, so they stood down, right? They followed their leader. Saul gets up, he leaves the cave. Verse 8, David also, he arose up afterward, and he went out of the cave, and he called out to Saul, saying, my Lord, the king. Look at how David calls to him after Saul leaves. And Saul's far enough away, but David can still shout. Imagine that for you guys who have been to En-Gedi. Oh, so cool. Imagine David standing out there, holding up the edge of Saul's robe, yelling across the valley there at Saul over there. Hey, Saul, my Lord, my king. He calls him my Lord, my king. Wow. Still showing him respect. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth, and he bowed down. And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, indeed, David seeks your harm? Wow. David even stooped his face to the earth. And he says, Saul, why do you listen to liars about me? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eye spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil or rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you, yet you hunt my life to take it. Verse 12, let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a flea? Therefore, let the Lord judge and judge between you and me, and see and plead my case, and deliver me out of your hand. Wow. David's just saying, God's going to deal with this. Let him show you. I've been very good to you, Saul. Very good. And you seek to kill me. You listen to liars. That ain't cool. He says, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Notice David, he reveals his presence. Verse 8, he bows down and calls him king. Verse 10, I was in the cave. When you were relieving yourself, I could have killed you. Verse 11, David calls him father. What kind of father was Saul to David? Yet this incredible respect. Also in verse 11, he continues, look, the corner of your robe has been cut, and I cut it. And I have it here in my hand. Imagine, again, you're to Getty. I mean, imagine seeing all these things if you get a chance to visit there. But so David revealed his presence, and David also, he rebuked Saul. Verse 9, why do you listen to people that lie to you about me? Verse 11, you know there's no evil in my hand against you. I'm not rebellious against you. I haven't even sinned against you. I don't even talk evil about you. Yeah, you seek to kill my life. Saul, this is totally evil. What's up with that? But you know what this does? It confirms what it means to not touch the Lord's anointed. David did not kill Saul or falsely even accuse him or gossip about him, but he did confront him with the truth. So when some preacher, you hear some preachers say, don't touch the Lord's anointed, when they've been stealing, when they've been cheating on their wife, when they've been doing these things, and they say, don't touch the Lord's anointed. No, David didn't kill Saul, but he confronted him. So that stuff is just total nonsense when you hear that kind of thing. Look at this also. So what David, he revealed his presence, he rebuked Saul, and see, he relinquished vengeance to the Lord. In verses 12 and 13, Lord, it's all yours. Let the Lord judge. Maybe the Lord will kill you one day. The TLB says this, maybe the Lord will kill you one day for what you are doing to me, but I will never harm you. Isn't that interesting? The Lord will deal with it. So the Lord's going to deal with you. Know that, and it did happen later on. It did happen. We'll get to that, not tonight, not in this message. Maybe the Lord will kill you one day for Saul for what you've done, but I am not going to do that. I'm not going to do whatever the Lord does. That's what He's going to do. In the meantime, I'm just going to be surrendered to Him. The last thing we see here is this outrage that is postponed. Check this out. Verse 16. We'll read on through the end of this. Verse 16 tells us, so it was, when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, that Saul said, is this your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. I mean, really? Oh, David, I just love you. Then he said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me with good, whereas I have rewarded you with evil. He's admitting that part. And you have shown this day how you have dealt well with me. For when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him get away safely? Therefore may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now I know indeed that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hands. So Saul knows this. Saul knows David's anointed. He's going to be king. But he's so jealous. And so he's like, okay, now there's just more proof you're better than me. You really are the king. He knows this. He's wrestling back and forth. He can see God's hand working with him. Wow. Therefore, swear now to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house. So David swore by the Lord, and Saul went home. But David and his men, they went up to the stronghold. They went back to En-Gedi. I look at this and go, wow. Check this out. So David is doing the right thing. There's a proverb that says, Solomon wrote it in 16 verse 7. David's son, Solomon, wrote, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Maybe Solomon, when he wrote that, he was thinking about his dad. I remember my dad telling me this story about this time when Saul was chasing him, and he probably did tell him. Probably sat there and said, let me tell you what happened. Before I took the throne, I had this opportunity to take out Saul. I didn't do it. And Saul temporarily, he admitted I should be king. He said, you're the anointed one. David, you're wonderful. I can't believe I've done this. Maybe Solomon was thinking about his dad David when he wrote that proverb. But here's the scoop. David's obedience to the Lord and his actions of love towards Saul made all the difference in softening Saul's heart. Very cool. Very cool. As I look at this and I think about some of the great faith lessons that we have, let's work through some of these faith lessons, just a few of them, all right? Here's the first one. You will never regret forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. I like that. You'll never regret forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. That's what Jesus did for us. In Romans chapter 5, verse 8, the Bible tells us that while we are sinners, God demonstrated his own love for us in this, that Christ died for us. Think of it this way. We are never more like Christ than when we forgive someone who doesn't deserve it. Think of that. That's where David was, right? Saul didn't deserve it. David did this. God makes his enemy at peace with him, at least for that time. God's hand was still with David. David, he could have ended the circumstances. He could have seized the kingdom, but he said, I'm going to wait for the Lord to do what the Lord has said he's going to do with my life. In the meantime, I'll just go through the wilderness. I'll go through the suffering until God puts it all together. Romans chapter 12, verse 20 says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Saul's heart, you could say, was melted by the coals of kindness that David heaped upon his head. Again, bottom line, you're never more like Christ than when we forgive someone who doesn't deserve it. Second takeaway, as I mentioned, second faith lesson, as I mentioned, there's only 3 of them right now. This is the second one. Let God do God's job. Let God do God's job. Isn't that good? How David's men must have wished that David would kill Saul so their lives as fugitives would end. As far as his men could see, and it is somewhat true, Saul was the obstacle in the way of the promise. Think of that. What's the obstacle in the way of the promise for you? Do you look at it as being other people? Do you look at it as just being whatever circumstance, a relationship? You're thinking, oh, I got this obstacle of having no money, whatever it is. Do things God's way and let God take care of the obstacles. In this case, sometimes we think these things are obstacles when they're not. We've made them obstacles because of our own jealousy. To Saul, David was the obstacle because he knows David's supposed to have the throne. David knew Saul, really, he was the obstacle that got in the way, but he still let God do this God's way. David's men believed David needed to seize the promise of God by the sword. Sometimes we just get this way and we want to change our circumstances. We want to change the other person, but we can't change another person's heart. Only God can do that. Saul was what Saul was. Eventually, God will take out Saul. David realized that, so David did what David could do, and he left everything in God's hands. That's pretty remarkable. David did what David could do. David could have taken the sword, but he didn't. David did something that's actually harder. Submitted to the Lord, humbled himself, didn't do anything. He said, I'm going to that's way harder when it is in the power of your hand to put the deal with that problem person, that obstacle, whatever it is, but you know God is showing you something different? David knew God was showing him something different. Every single thing made sense for David to take out Saul, but he didn't, because he knew God was showing him something different. That is a much harder thing to do when it's in the power of your hand to do otherwise. David knew this. God put Saul in a position of king, and it was God's job to take care of Saul as God see fit. Romans chapter 12 says, verse 19, "Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay." Wow. I like that. I like that. Really good. In fact, if you were to put it another way, it's simply this: don't take it upon yourself to be the instrument of God's judgment. David, remarkable the way he responded in character. Final takeaway: ask yourself, do little sins bother me? Think of it this: sin broke David's heart, but sin hardened Saul's heart. Think of it like that. Sin broke David's heart, but sin hardened Saul's heart. David does this little thing, cuts off the corner of the robe of Saul, and was it sin? We don't know, but David felt really bad. David's like, how could I have even done that? I'm thinking maybe God wanted him to, so he could dangle it out there and say, Saul, look at this. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Cut off a corner of the robe. And he felt bad about it. That's remarkable. Do little things bother you? Saul, with his sin, it hardened his heart. Listen, Saul is trying to kill David, chasing him all over. He's already had 80 priests slaughtered at Nob. We saw that previously. And Saul's going to come back to hunt David again. So this isn't genuine repentance he goes into. This is genuinely, I give up the throne to David. No, he wouldn't give up his throne. He wouldn't give up his position. He wouldn't give up his power. Eventually, God will have to take him out. He's actually going to come back again against David. After all the kind words he says, it was just lip service. Sin hardened Saul's heart. Wow. But do you feel bad over little things? I would challenge you as you look at this and say, what great faith lessons there are here. Looking at David, you start to examine yourself. Am I jealous? Am I like Saul or am I like David? We're probably going to fall into more of one camp than the other. And David wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Not at all. But he was able to humble himself and able to realize he's a sinner over a little thing. Later on, he's going to sin over something bigger, much, much bigger. He'll get called out. That's later on in his life, called out by Nathan the prophet. But you look at these dynamics and you realize, what camp am I in? Am I enraged against people? Do I see everybody as an obstacle? Do I got to get my own way? Am I demanding? Or can I recognize, wait a minute, let me come along the side of a David. Or David recognizing, I'm not going to take out Saul. That's God's job. If God has called me to do this thing or do that thing, I'll let God do it. I'll let God work in this relationship, in this situation, whatever it is, and we move forward. Listen, as we look at the Bible, it's great just being able to go verse by verse, isn't it? Indeed it is. And I want to thank you guys for joining us. I love going through the Bible. Thank you for joining us. If you would like, share, and subscribe with this channel. It's free to do those things. Just share them with other people. As we go through the Bible, we get these different faith lessons. And looking forward to just being encouraged, strengthening one another, building our faith. All of the world, everything is coming together regarding what we know, the Bible prophecy, second coming of Christ. Jesus himself said, when you see these things begin to take place, look up and lift up your head because your redemption draws near. You can see them beginning. They're not going to be fulfilled till the tribulation, but we can see them beginning. So we look up, we lift up our head, but we stay about the Lord's business. We share the love of Christ with others. We share the truth of Christ with others, and we look forward to the time when he is going to call us home. God bless you, everybody. Thank you for joining me. And again, if you would, really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, and share, and see you tomorrow.